Hi guys, so today I'll be walking you briefly through what Swift code is and how to get started with it. So right now, Swift code is this dashboard and an SDK. But with these two simple things, you're able to connect to multiple African APIs that you would need without having to spend time setting it up, having to write the same boilerplate code over and over again. So it saves you a lot of time. You can just get started building. But not just that, it also gives you so much more information on your API calls. You can track the speed, you see the latency at every stage. If there's an error, you can see immediately at what point in the pipeline that error occurred, and you no longer have to worry about API key exposure because you enter your API key in the terminal when you're initiating the service, and the rest is handled by Swift code. So I'll be walking you through exactly how this works. Let's start with this Paystack example. So here, this example shows how I would normally have had to set up Paystack if I was using it manually without Swift code. Here I would have to import Axios, you can get the standard. Then I would have to manually configure the secret key. I would have to have it in my environmental file here. Then I would have to manually set up the Axios instance using their base URL. Then I would have to set up the integration manually. Here in this example, we're using the create plan function. So I'd have to enter all these params manually. Then I would have to also navigate Paystack's own response structure and then get the information I need and pass this plan. So in total, that's about 60 lines of code. But if I was using Paystack for this, all I would need to do is import a Swift code SDK. If I was using Swift code for this rather, all I would need to do is import the Swift code SDK, initiate the clients by passing the Swift code API key, and I can call the plan immediately. All I have to do here is with this line, and I can access that plan without having to set up the authentication, having to manually set up anything that has to do with integration. And I can call the plan, and this is less than half of what I would have had to do manually. So it essentially simplifies what the boilerplate code you would have normally have to have been repeating every single time, every single project you are setting up. You can just get started with building. Another example here is this Flutterwave setup. If I was going to manually be using this the same way, I would have to configure my Flutterwave with the secret key. Then I would have to manually set up Axios. I would have to then write the integration manually, structure everything out manually. Then I can get the function. This is a total of 66 lines of code, but with Swift code, I could do the same thing in less than in about half that. All I do is import the Swift code SDK, initiate the client, and I can call the function with this here, client flutter with initiate payment. I don't have to bother about different things, and here I don't have to also bother about Paystack's response structure being different from Flutterwave response structure being different from a different API's response structure. There's a unified response structure in everything I'm getting back, so I can just align my code with that. So essentially just makes your life very, very easier. Then on the dashboard here, this is a fresh user's dashboard to show you through how getting set up works. So the first thing you would need is your Swift code API key. Here you come to the authentications tab, you can just create your first API key depending on what environment you're building for. If you're on live or if you're trying to generate a test key, here you can decide which one it is. In this case, I'll be going with the test key, so you can name it test key. Then you just create it. That's it. So I have my API key here. Once you have this, you can then just set that up in your environmental variable here, and you're good to go. So the first thing you would need to do when you want to use a service is here on the integrations page. You would need to first of all connect to the service here. So in this case, we could use say Paystack as an example. So here I select, I choose the Paystack API key. Here it shows you essentially how it works. So credentials for Paystack are never entered on this dashboard. We only enter it in your terminal to keep things secure. Then once you're connected, you run this code here, npx sweeftcode-sdk, setup, then Paystack. That is how you would enter your API key for that specific service. So it doesn't happen here on the dashboard. So you continue, register the connection, and you're connected. That's it. So since I'm connected here, I take my API key, then all I have to do here, once you would have had to install the Swiftcode SDK on your project by this npm swiftcode npm install swiftcode SDK SDK. In this case, I would want to install the latest version, so at latest. So I already have this set up on my system, but if you don't have this set up yet, this is exactly what you would need to run. So once I'm done with that, the next thing I want to do is I want to pass my Paystack API key so I can start using Swift code for it. So the same, I just get the same code I got here, I paste it here, and immediately I can run this. Whatever, this is the same code across all services. So if I was going to be doing this for Flutterwave, it would be setup Flutterwave. If I was going to be doing this for say Youverify, is the exact same thing. So in this case, Paystack, and I pass my yes, let me increase this here. Then here I enter the Paystack API key. So in this case, say well you would get this from your dashboard on Paystack. So you would once you've already set up with the service themselves, they've given you the API key. It's that API key that you would then copy and paste here. Once you've done that, it's immediately saved. So here at this point, it's encrypted. Then the encrypted credentials are stored in AWS Secret Manager. So we never pass it in any response. We never pass it in any message. We only use it when authenticating the functions themselves. And that's it. You can start using Swift code on your projects. On your dashboard for each of the services, you get to see the API docs for them here, then API docs or view API docs. So for all the function that service has, we have detailed API documentation on how you would call each and every one of them, the exact structure, the exact parameters that are needed. We also have example requests and the response formats that they come back with example responses. So yeah, we try to make it as detailed as possible. So earlier I also mentioned that you'd have more information, you'd have detailed information on your API calls. In this case, this is a new account. So let me open an already used account. Yes. In this case, I already have an account that has some activity, already has 5 integrations, 11 API calls, and has an API key. So in this case, when I go to view logs, you can see there's already activity here. Here it's showing me the 2 SDK errors detected. So these are errors that have nothing to do with my API calls and have to do from the errors from the SDK itself. Then here I see the success rate for my calls across all my calls. I see the average latency, so I know how the speed that my whole system is running on. I see which service has the most errors. I see which one has the slowest call and what specific call it was. In this case, it was the send email call. And I see the service itself, the percentage of successful calls it's had here. Paystack has 0, so all the calls have been errors from Paystack itself. And then Gmail has been 100%, so it's been 100% successful. So in this case, you see all the calls that were made from the accounts. So in this case, you can see here there's create plan. All the calls that were made with Paystack were create plan. So in this case, you would see exactly what error it is. You see here from the SDK it went through, but here from Paystack itself it was rejected because the Paystack key was invalid. In this case, we're using a test key, so that was not an actual Paystack key. So yes, 100% it would be invalid. Then next, you can see the SDK, the amount of time the code took on the SDK, the amount of time it took when it was authenticating. So you have that detailed information. Then here, I would want to show you, say, the SDK level error. So you see the same thing. So the SDK picked up the specific error that happened with the Paystack API key and recorded it here as well. So here you see a successful call. This was with Gmail, a send email call. So you see here, it passed through the SDK, passed through authentication, it passed through the gateway, the provider was successful, and then we got a successful response. And on each level, you see the speed that each one of them took to get you the total speed that API call took. So if there's any optimizations you want to make, you can make them. You can see the service, you can see the action, the scope, the status, the duration of how long it took, and when it was called. So these are just some of the benefits that you would get with using Swift code. The point was just to how could we reduce the amount of time you spent on boilerplate repetitive stuff so you can just get started with coding. And some of these services have very complicated setups and each of them has its own structure. You'd have to spend sometimes days going through different documentations. The point was just to simplify that entire process. You could just import the Swiftcode SDK, use it, and get started building. So I hope I've been able to make everything as clear as I can for you. If you have any issues, feel free to leave any comments. Feel free to reach out to us on our website, and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much.